We are at Senate House at the University of London, and today's event is Early Women in Philosophy in London. And what we're really looking at are some of the figures that I think have maybe gone a little bit underexplored or underappreciated. There's slowly becoming more acknowledgement that there were students of some of the famous philosophers and colleagues of some of the famous philosophers who were perhaps contributing some of the core ideas that these people are well known for. So we have 4 speakers today from around the UK, academics in philosophy departments, and they're experts in the history of analytic philosophy. And I'm not sure exactly what's in store today, but I hope that we'll get a better sense of some of the big ideas that many of us are familiar with and exactly where they came from.
This is Stebbing, announcing to more, I am writing an introductory textbook on logic. I'm Siobhan Chapman, and I was talking this morning about Susan Stebbing, who's a very interesting philosopher from the early decades of the 20th century. I was looking particularly at the letters that she wrote to the philosopher G.E. Moore. She sometimes gets described as being a pupil or a disciple of G.E. Moore, whereas in fact the letters show us that she was not just going along with what Moore said, but often fighting against him, disagreeing with him. Stebbing was particularly important because she brought together the more abstract logical approaches to philosophy with more practical applied uses in everyday situations and increasingly in political and social problems that she addressed. Many of the philosophers of her time were not really engaging in the same way, and she increasingly felt it was important to write for a broader audience and to bring these philosophical issues to a wider public.
Lots of the people who reminisce about her talk about how philosophy was really central to her own identity.
I'm Sophia Connell, and I'm at Bedford College. I'm a senior lecturer in philosophy. And today I was talking about the philosopher Sophie Bryant, who lived in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And she was a head teacher of a school, but on the side she wrote books and articles about the philosophy of mind, ethics, and philosophy of the emotions. One of the things I was trying to get across today was that we should look back to her writing and her work from this period because it's been forgotten. She thought it was really important that people of all genders and classes were able to access higher education. She has messages that are still relevant for us today, such as the fact that we should be humble when we approach the work of others. We should read it carefully and try and understand it and be open-minded to others' views, and that will make us more sympathetic human beings as well.
Okay, so let me just say something about each of these women, and then I'm going to explain what I'm going to do in the talk with them. So my name is Stacey Friend. I'm a reader in philosophy at Birkbeck, University of London, and I was giving a talk about early women in analytic aesthetics. And the women I was talking about were people like Helen Knight, who wrote a piece that was very important at the time on the use of the term good in aesthetic judgments. Margaret MacDonald, who is famous across philosophy in a bunch of ways, but is often ignored for her work in aesthetics. Ruth Saw, who was one of the founders of the British Society of Aesthetics and later its president. And finally, Meager, who was the secretary of the British Society of Aesthetics for 30 years. So my take-home message would be that people really need to go back and read some of these writers because they've been obscured, and it's to our disadvantage that they have, because they had really interesting contributions to debates that we care about.
In all of the English-speaking world, at least, all of the women who had academic jobs in philosophy were all doing either logic broadly conceived or history. Hello, I'm Frederique Jansen-Larray, a lecturer at University of Manchester. My talk was about Constance Jones and her sense reference distinction. This is a really famous distinction which all philosophy of language students have to meditate on. Usually we hear of the sense reference distinction as being a distinction made up by Frege. People just attribute this distinction to Frege, which they didn't in her day. There is a paper by a woman called Augusta Klein where she says this distinction where you attribute two intentions to one referent was first discovered by Miss Jones in 1890 and a few years later by Professor Frege. So it was known in her day, but it's been written out of history.
I think today's important because it's maybe casting some light on philosophers who've maybe their work's been neglected or not fully appreciated. It's like finding hidden gems somehow.
Us looking into the work of female philosophers, teaching us something also about the work of the male philosophers and sort of their standing is actually something that I personally work on and think about a lot. Events like this where researchers can actually share their ideas and their findings help us to kind of rectify some of that history.
Well, I hope that people will take away that understanding sort of how we got to where we are might contribute to people feeling like they want to look more carefully at some of the people from the past, both men and women, and also that going forward that we feel like this is a place that's going to continue to be sort of a place for philosophy for everyone.